A federal judge says a Christian preschool in Buena Vista can get state funding even though its hiring practices are at odds with anti-discrimination laws in Colorado. Darren Patterson Christian Academy in Buena Vista filed a federal lawsuit in June of 2023. They asked to be exempt from state requirements prohibiting discrimination based on religion, sexual orientation, or gender identity. The lawsuit claimed those protections violated their religious right to hire people who shared their faith. Well, this week, the judge agreed they can get funding for the state's universal preschool program and keep their hiring policies. Joining me this morning to discuss this case is our 9 News legal expert, Whitney Traylor. Thanks for coming in.
Sure, good morning.
There's so much to this right now.
Yes.
So first of all, this case didn't even get to trial. Tell us about the ruling.
Yeah, so this was issued on a summary judgment motion, so it didn't go to trial, and the judge just ruled on Monday in favor of the school. And so this case stems back to 2020 when the voters approved this universal preschool program, which allowed 4-year-olds to have up to 15 hours of free preschool. As part of that program, though, the state imposed these anti-discrimination laws. So it said, look, schools, if you apply for this money and get this money, you can't discriminate based on race, religion, your where you live, the amount of money you have, and also sexual orientation and gender identity. So the school requested a religious exemption, which they didn't get. And so now the school sued to say, hey, we should be able to get this money, but we shouldn't have to change the crux of what we do,
right,
which is to maintain these Christian principles,
right,
and as it relates to sexual orientation and gender identity specifically. And so the court just ruled on Monday in favor of the school, saying, hey, Colorado, you can't withhold these funds, and you should have essentially given them this religious exemption.
So there was a similar case in June of last year. A federal judge issued a different ruling.
Yes.
And that one, how are these cases different?
Right, so it was the same issue, but in that case, it was 2 Catholic schools who had asserted the same request for a religious exemption and said, look, we shouldn't have to change the way that we do things on a religious front from, for example, using pronouns and dress codes and bathroom issues and that kind of thing. And there the court ruled in their favor on the religious exemption, saying that, yeah, you can essentially discriminate on religion, if you will, but not on the sexual orientation and gender identity. So that ruling was really different than this ruling. They were 2 different federal judges, which happens all the time.
Does the ruling for the Christian school in Buena Vista now set a precedent for other private or religious schools going forward?
Yes, I think it does. Well, it doesn't set binding precedent because this is a trial court level, but this is one case of many across the country, because this is a major issue that's going on across the country.
Right.
And the Supreme Court has actually ruled on this, where they said that, look, if there's public funding and you have private secular schools receiving funds, then you can't disallow private religious schools. But where the Supreme Court didn't address the issue was related to these anti-discrimination requirements. Mm-hmm. So the court said, yeah, you as a private religious school, you can receive these public funds, but it didn't say whether or not they could discriminate based on sexual orientation, gender identity, and things of that nature. So with all these cases going forward, I suspect that they will ultimately end up at the Supreme Court.
All right, so an appeal has already been filed in this case.
Yes.
What do you see now going forward?
Yeah, so the appeal was filed. I don't think there was an appeal filed yet on this Darren Patterson Christian Academy, which that ruling just came out on Monday. Mm-hmm. But there was an appeal filed on the Catholic schools. They actually appealed the decision to the 10th Circuit. So I don't know how the 10th Circuit is going to rule, but either way, I think whoever loses that is going to appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court. And because this is such a major issue, and specifically whether or not, I think the funding has been established, and a lot of people complain about this and really would liken this to what's happening in the federal government right now. I think there is a corollary argument, right, when there's an executive order saying there's only two genders. Mm-hmm. And withhold funding from these folks who don't adhere to this executive order. That's essentially what the state is saying here. Hey, we're going to give you this money, but you have to comply with our anti-discrimination laws. So I think there's that corollary argument, but with this conservative Supreme Court, I suspect if it ultimately ends up there that the schools will probably win.
There is so much to this.
Yeah.
I have a feeling we're going to be talking a lot more about this in the future, but for now, thank you so much for coming in.
Of course, my pleasure.
All right.